Good morning, guys. I'm really sorry we can't be there again today in person, but today we are going to learn about the perspectives in psychology. Now, if you remember when we did the perspectives in sociology, it was a little challenging at first because it was kind of a different way of thinking, something you've never thought of before. So don't be alarmed today, you guys, if these four perspectives are going to be a little bit tricky. You remember at the beginning of Soch, it was really challenging, but then by the time we got to the end, because you guys had used them so much, you were doing really well. So I'm confident that it will be the same in psychology. So I just want to talk a little bit about where these perspectives come from and who we attribute them to. Now, I had you guys look at some famous psychologists and also some famous cases, because sometimes we remember the psychologist, sometimes we remember the case. So the four perspectives are biological, psychoanalytical, behavioral, and learning. Sometimes you'll see it called cognitive. Now the first one, the biological, that actually comes to us from one of the cases. If you guys looked at Phineas Gage for one of your research cases, this was a gentleman that worked on the railroads, and he was actually hit in the head by one of the railroad spikes, and it went through his brain, but he did manage to survive. But the reason this was such a big deal in psychology is because his personality changed. So people were actually able to compare what his personality was like before, what his personality was like after. They looked at what parts of his brain had been damaged, and for the first time we were actually able to say, okay, well, I think this part of the brain is actually responsible for this. So his case was really, really fundamental to the biological perspective. Now, the second one, psychoanalytical, that has to do with Sigmund Freud. So the psychologists that Caitlin and Chaley looked at. Now, psychoanalytical is going to be maybe one of the trickiest, but again, I think you guys will get it by the time we get to the end. The next one, too, was also one of our psychologists. I think this was Madison, Libby, and Liam, looking at B.F. Skinner and behavioral. And then the last one, learning cognitive, this had to do with one of our research cases. I think Jada might have been the only one who actually did the research case on Pavlov's dogs, but actually explaining how we learn and how that can attribute to why we think, act, and feel the way that we do. So that's all four of them. Again, it's just four different ways to basically explain why we think, act, and feel the way that we do. So we've got biological, cognitive, psychoanalytical, and behaviorist. Again, we're going to use these four perspectives, these ways to explain why people think, why they act, and why they feel the way that they do. So I think the biological perspective may be one of the easiest because it tends to be one of the most straightforward. Biological psychologists assume that our mental processes and our behaviors, again, why do we think, act, and feel the way that we do? Well, it's all made possible by our nervous system, something attributed to the brain. But I also want you guys to consider sometimes it's not just our brain. You also have to take into account our hormones. If you're ever looking at a case study, look at the age of the patient. It may have something to do with their endocrine system, with their hormones. Also, too, look at their genes, their genetics. Some of our psychological disorders are going to be genetic. So if you see a parent or a sibling suffering from something, it may explain why your patient thinks, acts, and feels the way that they do. So that's perspective number one, the biological. Number two, the cognitive, the role of the mind. Remember, guys, cognitive is just a fancy word for thinking. So the cognitive perspective emphasizes the role that thoughts play in determining behavior. So if you're looking at why a person thinks, acts, and feels the way that they do, the cognitive perspective is going to say it has something to do with literally the way they construct thoughts. They investigate the ways in which people perceive information and the way they make mental images of the world, solve problems, dream, and daydream. If you're looking at a case and you're trying to explain why someone thinks, acts, and feels the way they do using the cognitive perspective, look for words like false perception. They're thinking about the world incorrectly. Again, cognitive means thinking. So if you're going to use this perspective, it's literally in the construction of a person's thoughts. Now, the behavioral perspective. This is all about the role of experience. The behavioral perspective emphasizes the effects of the effects of experience on behavior. So this is what we saw with Skinner and with the rats and with the birds. So the idea is, if you're going to explain why someone thinks, acts, and feels the way that they do, it has something to do with the way their behavior was reinforced. You were given punishments, you were given rewards, or you learned it by observing other people's behavior. So again, kind of just like it sounds, if you want to tell me why someone thinks, acts, and feels the way they do, according to the behavioral perspective, well, it's because their behavior has been reinforced, or because they've learned that behavior from someone else. Last but not least, the one by Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalytical perspective. Again, Freud is not going to look at your biology. It's not about the way you think, and it's not about the way you behave. He argued that there were forces happening inside you subconsciously. So the psychoanalytical perspective stresses the influence of unconscious forces on the behavior. Maybe the reason you think, act, and feel the way that you do is because you've actually got subconscious feelings and thoughts buried within you that are manifesting themselves. We fight to control early childhood experiences only to have them resurface at a later time. So if you're looking at a case and you're trying to argue from a psychoanalytical perspective, look for something that happened in that person's early childhood that could be explaining why they think, act, and feel the way that they do now. Maybe they didn't deal with some sort of trauma or abuse, and now it's manifesting itself in whatever disorder or behavior that we're seeing today. Okay, guys. So there are way more perspectives in psychology than we're actually looking at. I've kind of cut our list down for us. So we are not going to be looking at evolutionary. In the past, I've looked at humanistic, but we tend to run out of time, so I'm just going to take it off the list now. We're not going to look at humanistic. We're not going to we're not going to look at sociocultural because we kind of already did that in Soc. And we are not going to look at the last one. So we've got biological, cognitive, psychoanalytic, and which would be learning. Okay, you guys knew this unit was going to be all about memes. I ain't nothing but a hound dog, and I keep crying all the time. So what I've got for you guys, I've actually posted a case. It's for Billy. I want you to read Billy's case study, and then I want you to explain his behavior to me using our 4 perspectives, okay? Don't be afraid to try, you guys. I know it might be looking and it might be thinking in a little bit different way than you have before, but I also gave you a little cheat sheet on Google Classroom. So use that, use your notes, use the video lecture to help you, and email me if you have any specific questions. Good luck, you guys.